Hey everybody, this is James, and today we're going to take a look at the game I made for Ludum Dare 48 in just 72 hours. It was a fun jam this time around, and I made a game where you control two characters and have to switch between them to solve puzzles and reach an amazing treasure. Before I jump into how I made the game, if you want to play the game for yourself, you can follow the link in the description below and play it in your browser for free. And with that said, let's jump back to the beginning and see how we made the game. The theme was announced to be deeper and deeper. And as usual with a game jam, I started off the first night struggling to come up with an idea, but I eventually settled on the idea of controlling two characters at once and naming them both variations of the word deeper. In the morning, I started working on ideas for the game and how the mechanics would work, and then dove into making the basics of switching the players. I also accidentally made them look like Among Us characters, which wasn't really my intention and was kind of the characters I dealt with for most of the weekend. I then started working on the basics of the mechanics for each player. I had a whole bunch of ideas for interactions to do between them, but I was trying to be really conscious with the jam of not over-scoping. So I just focused on some of the more basic ones for the first day. In the end, that worked out well because this really helped focus things for the game later on. With most of the character mechanics working, I started working on some of the game systems, like adding the menus, controller support, camera switching, as well as adding in a level select system which at this point had no levels to use in it. I had most of the game's basic systems working at this point, so I wrapped up the first day planning to get started on doing some level design in the morning. In pretty much every game jam I do, I normally end up working on the mechanics and art stuff for most of the time and then cramming all the level design in at the very end, which usually ends up with it feeling a little unbalanced when you're playing through the game itself. This time I wanted to do it differently, so I started working on the levels themselves on day 2, having nailed down the mechanics I would already use. Although I was trying to keep from overscoping and adding new things as I went through the jam, one thing I did decide to add in at this point was dialogue between the two characters. It seemed like a bit of a potential time waste at this point because I didn't have that system working, so I could have been writing it all for nothing, but I really wanted to add in some humour to the game and help flesh out the relationship between those two characters. So as I went through the process of designing the levels, I also wrote out dialogue between the two and placed it roughly where I wanted that dialogue to happen in the game. Although I planned to spend this time on level design, I didn't originally think that it would take me all day. I could have cut some of the later mechanics and levels from the game, but I was enjoying making the levels and the progression they were bringing, so I ended up working on level design until pretty late on that day. I did sneak in working on a pause menu and making the end screens for the game with a good and a bad ending depending on what you did with the diamond at the end too. With all the level design done, I had a little bit of time to work on the basics of the dialogue system at that point, but at this point it was pretty late, so I needed to get some sleep and I'd return to do all this other stuff in the morning. The final day! So yeah, waking up and remembering that I still had a lot of stuff to do, I got to work on making art for the levels themselves and then spent a few hours adding it into those levels and making them look at least passable. One really handy thing here was getting Unity's tile map extras from GitHub to be able to randomly place tiles and add some variety in for the ground and walls once I had them all drawn. With the levels done and the dialogue segments now working, I got to recording audio. I wanted two main things for the audio in the game: recording some voice lines for when you switched between characters and having some audio for when the text appeared in the dialogue boxes. Rather than having some randomized beeps, I wanted it to feel like voices speaking, like you see in a variety of games like Animal Crossing or Undertale or something. It was something I'd never tried before, but worked pretty well in the game. And if you'd like to see a tutorial on doing something like that, let me know in the comments after you've slapped that subscribe button, obviously. I then spent some time adding all those sounds into the game and adding in a little dialogue cutscene for the intro, and suddenly it was 3 hours until the deadline and I had exactly 0 character art in the game. I wanted to keep the art nice and simple, so eventually I settled on drawing them with separated hands and feet to make animating them in Unity as easy as possible. Then I frantically brought them into Unity and set them all up with nice simple animations, and I quite like how they actually turned out. Apart from the dialogue stuff, there was also no sound in the game, so I quickly got some sound effect assets and music from packs I owned and threw them in with a simple system to play the music tracks across the levels. I didn't actually have time to test that music system, but luckily it seems to have not caused any problems. And with all that, I was finally done. I'm pretty happy with how the game turned out overall. I definitely spent longer on level design than I intended to, so I ended up with the opposite problem of what I normally have, of having to squash in art and sound design to the last few hours. But ultimately, I think it ended up as a better playing game because of it, and the dialogue and voiceover stuff really helps sell the fun of the game. So it was definitely worth doing and definitely worth spending that time on those systems. Thanks for watching this video, and if you want to check the game out for yourself, there's a link in the description down below where you can play the game in your browser. You don't have to download anything, it's really handy. I'll be back soon with more tutorials and an update on Scoot Kaboom, so stay tuned and I'll see you all very soon.